Get a cup, get a cup, get a cup. Hello. Welcome back, everyone, to another video on Fresh Cuts Limited. Today, we're looking at Australia's quiet collapse by How Money Works. Now, How Money Works makes really cool videos. I haven't reacted to one for a little bit now, but yeah, with that being said, the original link's in the description. Let's begin.
Staying on top of all the developments in finance, business, and economics can be exhausting. Between everything becoming an excuse to gamble, corporate consolidation of markets, and political influence driving huge asset bubbles, causing extreme wealth inequality, spiraling consumer debt, and diminishing savings, stagnating wages, unaffordable real estate, and generational wealth divides, all string tied together by questionable government programs, it's enough to get pretty depressing. But just remember, it could—
Is there an ad coming? I feel like there's an ad coming.
Be worse. We could be Canada. And if that wasn't bad enough, somehow there is a country that is pushing these issues even further, and as a warning for how bad things could get, has managed to hold on for now. Let's call it Canada with snakes.
Around 200,000.
Is Australia really doing that bad? I have not actually heard anything about Australia in a long time.
Electronic poker machines, known as pokies, fill bars, pubs, clubs and casinos.
Capping losses at $100 a day and $5,000 a year.
In Australia is officially the worst on record, with the average property costing 8 times the median household income.
Sydney's rental market has gone from bad to worse, with prices continuing to soar.
With Revelations, taxpayer money is being used on drugs.
It was a great idea having a barbecue today, hon. Great idea.
Too bad your aunt's here. That reminds me of the time I shoved a bag of jelly beans up my...
Honey, is she okay? Nope, that bitch dead.
Every year, up until its downfall, Credit Suisse would prepare a report that looked at how wealthy the people of the countries around the world were. Instead of just looking at GDP per capita, which calculates how much the average person in an economy produces in market output every year, this report attempted to calculate the net worth of those people to see how good they were at accumulating wealth over time. Someone with a high income that is spending everything they make on rent and overpriced food isn't going to grow their wealth as quickly as someone who has a more modest income but is paying off their own home and is investing diligently into retirement accounts.
Exactly. This is why basic financial knowledge needs to be taught in schools, because if you have a decent job, but you're able to, or you're wise enough to invest the money and pay off your loans and not just waste it on stupid crap, you'll probably do better than someone who has an amazing, paying job, but just wastes all of it and they're living paycheck to paycheck, right? If you think 20 years down the line, they're still going to be in the same position because they haven't corrected their behavior, but you probably, will be close to retirement.
I like to call this the San Fran tech bro conjecture. But according to these annual reports, the Australian people always looked like the second group of slower, more deliberate wealth builders. Their raw income isn't as high as here in America, but they were consistently some of the wealthiest people on the planet. UBS, which acquired Credit Suisse following its collapse, recently released the 2024 report, and once again, Australians had the second highest median net worth on the planet. They only fell behind Luxembourg, which is a European micronation, which you are probably not in the...
This tiny thing here is Luxembourg? I didn't know that. I think there's a Luxembourg in Tennessee. That's the only Luxembourg I knew.
Tax bracket to even be aware of. The fact that this report tracks the median instead of the average net worth is also really important. This means that the Australian right in the middle of a lineup from the richest to the poorest is more than twice as rich as an American in the same position. The report also includes a generic average where America does have a slight edge, but all—
Oh, wait, so they're doing a lot better? But I thought you said this was about them not doing good. What I miss here?
That really tells us is that we have an inequality problem with a small group right at the top massively dragging up the average at the expense of everybody else in line. Considering all of this, the title of this video might not make much sense to you.
Exactly. It sounds like they're doing pretty good.
Anybody would be lucky to be Australian, right? Well, yes and no. And lucky really is the important word here. Australia has become so wealthy by getting lucky in just a few key industries, and then by going all in on keeping those industries alive by any means necessary, including its own long-term viability. Of course, the most obvious place where this has happened is in the country's outrageous real estate market, which makes even the most overpriced cities in America look downright affordable by comparison. And of course, we will get to that. But housing is actually only just one symptom of much bigger structural problems that the country has been quietly trying to ignore. There are lots of people that look like they are
Holy frig, that's a big yacht. Oh my word. Wow. That's gotta cost at least 50 grand.
happily building wealth in Australia, and there are even a lot of people becoming extremely wealthy. But the different ways to actually obtain that wealth are very narrow.
Is that AI?
The key to Australian wealth is dirt. Either digging it out of the ground to export as unimproved natural resources, or by selling it back and forth to one another.
What?
Economic complexity
What? Just dirt? I don't understand. Their biggest customers must be sandcastle builders.
ranks a country's exports based on how varied they are, and how unique they are to that country. A country that exports a wide variety of highly unique products that only it produces would have high economic complexity. A country that only exports a few goods that lots of other countries also export would have low economic complexity. Australia has the lowest economic complexity of any high-income country in the world, ranking 102nd out of 146 total countries included in the survey. That has been falling consistently since the 1950s, when it was in the top 30 thanks to a combination of manufacturing as well as research and development coming out of the country. But today, this puts it behind places like Uganda, which have a more varied export base than Australia. It now depends
What do they export? Just like 4 things or something?
almost exclusively on selling natural resources and livestock to growing economies in Asia because it just doesn't make financial sense to focus anywhere else. Having such a resource-dependent economy means investors have to decide between funding new innovations that could improve the world, or at the very least, provide sustainable cash flows, or they could invest into developing more mines to export more resources to an existing list of willing buyers.
It makes more sense to do that, right? That's easier. That's a lot easier, and you know you're going to be making money off it. So I guess it makes sense why they're in their position.
The second option has just been a much safer bet for decades, which means that the country has some of the most advanced natural resource extraction in the world, but is severely behind in other areas of innovation like technology and advanced manufacturing. In some tragic irony, the Australian government itself has helped to fund a lot of scientific research resulting in advancements in solar panels, the advent of Wi-Fi, modern medical tools, and even Google Maps. Any of these alone would be a major contributor to the country's relatively small population. But when it came to actually commercializing these technologies, the country lost out because its dependence on natural resources undermined its business environment. Investors would rather the safe, predictable option, and so these technologies naturally moved to where they could find funding from other sources that were willing to take a risk. Unfortunately for Australia, this actually just ended up making their investment markets even more risky. For a long time, the Australian dollar was almost perfectly correlated with natural resource prices, which meant Australian investors were resource investors whether they liked it or not. This price connection has decoupled since COVID, but that itself is probably not a good sign. It could actually be the biggest indication that Australia has dug itself into a hole.
Especially if the world's trying to move away from natural resources, such as coal and that kind of stuff. However, I did hear, or I watched a video where someone talked about it, that there is no more coal development being done. Like, people aren't really putting money into developing how to get more coal and that kind of stuff. And if that is the case, as you know, the years move on, there's going to be less investment into the coal infrastructure. All right, I'm editing, and I don't think I explained it properly. So what I meant to say was that these underdeveloped countries, which are now, developing, still rely on the older kind of energy. So as there is no development of coal being done over the next, say, 30 or so years, these third world countries and these developing countries are going to be relying on that kind of coal stuff. And in turn, that is probably going to make the price of coal go up a lot, because if there's no development going into extracting it and refining it and whatever, and all these other countries are going to start relying on it, that produces a supply and demand difference, and that's going to increase the price of coal. So, Australia might still be fine a long time from now.
Both literally and figuratively, that it's going to be almost impossible to get out of without giving up a lot of the wealth it's become accustomed to. So it's time to learn how money works to find out how long Australia can keep getting away with it. There are dozens of serious problems just under the surface in Australia that you might not think of much by themselves, but together they changed the optics of the country from a thriving and vibrant economy to a place living on long borrowed time. One of those issues is gambling. Sports gambling, online casino.
This is not exclusive to Australia, okay? This is everywhere right now. I cannot count the amount of ads I've seen for sports gambling stuff. It should be banned. And if you think of it, when you're buying products from someone and you're giving your money to them and you're getting a product back, gambling isn't really like that. You're literally just giving money to businesses and you don't really get anything back. It's only a percentage of the time they pay out a little bit of money and you may win, right? But they aren't really manufacturing anything other than hope. So they're not really employing that many people for that. Like, if you think of it, the business around casinos is really predatory and it's not really helping the economy. When a normal business, if you buy a product from them, you get the product, you get to use their product, and people on their side are actually making their product, and there's more, benefit to the economy when you're buying stuff rather than gambling.
And market wagering has become one of the fastest growing industries here in America since regulations were loosened in 2018. Since then, billions of dollars have been piled into carving out market share, encouraging people to bet on basically anything. The rush to acquire customers has become so extreme that a lot of these companies aren't even running their online casinos at a profit because they are reinvesting as much as they can into growing their customer base as fast as possible.
And then they adjust the winning, the output ratio or whatever. I mean, that's how it works, right? They have a certain payout percentage or whatever. You know what, the machines where you just ding, 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 ding. Those are like the old-fashioned gambling machines, slots machines, right? Those have like a payout ratio. So you can, if you're the owner, you can set it to pay out like for every $100, it might pay out $5 or $20 or whatever. So there's like a percentage ratio that it could pay out. I assume they do that. I don't know for sure, but I assume they do the exact same stuff online. And it's a whole lot easier to do it if it's through an app or just coding where you can just say, okay, for every, I want you to pay out 20 or 30% and the business will keep the rest.
The reason why investors don't mind burning billions of dollars in a highly risky industry with serious regulatory risks is because of Australia. Australia is living in the future when it comes to gambling, and that future is bleak. According to their own government inquiries, Australians lose almost $1,000 per person every year through different forms of betting. That's inclusive of a
Is that on average? Because obviously not everyone gambles.
large share of the population who don't partake at all, so the losses of the average Aussie punter are statistically far worse. Australia has a deep, wide, and highly entrenched gaming industry. The average Australian pub operates like a mini casino complete with a small selection of electronic poker machines. Betting on sports is commonplace. Horse racing is a major tradition that even has its own public holiday. Novelty betting markets has been a major thing there for decades, and this is all on top of more traditional gambling like lotteries, casinos, and scratch-offs.
That's so crazy. Just like transferring money to a slot machine. That's unbelievable. I remember seeing some video. I think it was a viral video or something like that. But these slot machines you can link your bank account to. I guess that's probably what this person's doing. I'm not sure. But I remember seeing it where like someone transferred like 50 grand over to a slot machine. It's unbelievable stuff. This should not be allowed. It's not benefiting the economy. All you're employing are security guards and a couple programmers, and that's basically it. You're not actually employing people to manufacture anything. It's such a drain on the economy.
Back here in America, the venture capitalists have done the math and have figured out if they can replicate Australian-style gambling in a market as big as ours, then they can stand to make trillions. Australia is also a great business test case against the risk of regulation. Unsurprisingly, the sheer market penetration of gambling in Australia has caused problems for at-risk individuals, largely young men. On top of the financial consequences of losing thousands of dollars every year, the country has an epidemic of related issues like fraud, petty crime, and violence stemming from unhealthy gambling. The public also largely hates how prevalent gambling is pushed on them, so you would expect it would be easy to get the political support to pass laws to moderate the reach of this industry.
Why are they lobbied? Is the government lobbied or whatever, where they're not going to pass anything to ban it?
Right? Wrong. All of these companies employ lots of people, and they spend a huge amount of money on fear-mongering the job losses that would come if a local bar couldn't have a casino floor stapled onto it.
Yeah, there are going to be job losses. But do you know what doesn't make sense? Like, you're paying these people what? I think over there, their minimum wage is higher, but let's say you're paying them 20-something an hour. These machines rake in so much more. What makes more sense? That you shut these down, and all of a sudden you have millions of people saving tens of thousands of dollars a year, and with that money, they can go buy other products. And when you do that, you're actually supporting other people who are making these products. Or does letting these people lose thousands of dollars every year, and then all you're doing is employing a couple people who oversee it? Like, what? Obviously, it makes more sense to allow these whales, as it is, to spend that money in the economy and actually benefiting people. It makes more sense to do that rather than just throwing it down the drain and letting these big head honchos who own these gambling things give a couple bucks to their employees.
For any of you who haven't been to Australia, you might think I am joking. I am not joking. Australia has been extremely soft on regulation, and while gambling by itself is not single-handedly going to take down the country, it's emblematic of a lot of genuine issues that aren't getting addressed because nobody wants to be responsible for shaking up the delicate balance of prosperity. The same is true for the mining industry from earlier, and the real estate crisis.
I think slot machines specifically and the apps for gambling should be banned. Sports, such as like Polymart, where they do I forget the name of what kind of gambling it's on, but the only gambling I would say is okay in my opinion is gambling that can't be rigged. And what I mean is that say sports games, those can't really be rigged. Yes, you could have referees doing rigging stuff, but you can't have a casino rigging that. So that is something that I'm more fine with, as well as poker, but it can't be online. It has to be like in person, because the online stuff can be rigged with what cards are given out and whatnot.
Crisis that we still need to get to. There is nothing wrong with a country exporting its resources. The problem Australia has had is turning a revenue source that is good for Australia into money that is good for Australians. A lot of the revenue generated by mining in Australia has just been paid out to foreign mining companies in arrangements that are not that different from many exploited third world petrostates. Australia has tried in the past to generate more government revenue from its resources, but heavy lobbying won out, and people have been too afraid to try it again since the currency has been so dependent on these exports. In fact, the government has actually gone the other way and given hundreds of obscure grants, bonuses, deferments, schemes, and incentives to mining companies to help them along. According to the government's own minerals website, the intention of these schemes is for providing both commercial and operational advantages to investors. New government initiatives support the long-term sustainability of the Australian resources sector by de-risking and encouraging mineral exploration and discovery. One of the country's biggest problems is that nobody wanted to invest anywhere else, so this does seem a bit strange. But destabilizing this source of foreign income could knock over other highly leveraged areas of the economy, so their government is trying to keep it running hot by whatever means necessary. Now, at this point you might...
If things are going well and you have to fix something, you know the saying, if it is not broken, don't fix it, or whatever? If it's going well, but you could see that there's going to be a problem down the road, and you want to start trying to fix it now, it's inevitably going to lead to some kind of pain or issues.
Be thinking, how the f did this place get so rich to begin with? Was it really just putting a bigger number on their homes and calling that wealth? Well, yes, but there actually is still one more thing. Australia has a system called superannuation, which is a special tax-advantaged investment vehicle that Australian workers can use to save and invest for their retirement. It's functionally similar to a 401k or an IRA, but the big difference is that employers must contribute a share of their employees' pay into their nominated account every year.
Employers must? So if you're working at like a McDonald's, you have one? You have a 401k, equivalent if you work at McDonald's over there?
Instead of it being voluntary or offered as a part of their job package. Current contribution requirement is 11.5%, which means every Australian worker is effectively saving more than 10% of their income for retirement.
That's crazy. That's really good. Could you imagine if they did that in America? Good luck trying to do that, but that'd be, I could see why that would lead to, people having good net worths.
Something like that would make even a lot of disciplined financial planners blush.
Yeah, because then you could be absolutely stupid with money and yet you still have a retirement at the end.
The hope is that this money will eventually take the strain off the public-funded pensions as the Australian population gets older, and it has built some enormous fortunes. According to JP Morgan, the average Australian household now has the equivalent of almost $250,000 invested in just this one asset class, before including regular savings, investments, or home equity. The fact that it is mandatory and applied to all workers means that the concentration of retirement savings in the hands of already wealthy households isn't as high as it is here in America. This is genuinely an amazing financial tool.
Let me just see here. Get the calculator out. So they said what, 10% or 11% or something like that. If you're over there and you're making 100 grand a year, it's good money. So let's say you're getting around $10,000 worth of investing, right? Like that's $10,000 every year that they're contributing. So if you're doing that, if you work for 30 years, that's $300,000. That's pretty good, right? All right, I'm on another site here. I'm gonna do a little bit of a calculation. So look at that. After 30 years, it'll be worth around $1 million, $1,020,000. So that's almost retirement. All right, back to the video.
And you might be starting to notice a trend here. It has covered over a lot of other problems. Collectively, Australian superannuation is worth more than 2 trillion USD, which is only enough to buy 2/3 of Apple, but it has outgrown the Australian investment market because investment activity is just not as strong there. This means more and more of these retirement savings have been invested abroad, with the majority of that money ending up back here in the American markets. Now,
yeah, I don't think you'd want to invest in their stuff if it's just their whole, economy's based off of just a few things they export, right? Like it doesn't make sense trying to invest money over there.
Now, that alone is not a bad way to diversify risk outside of Australia. And yes, it's all getting pumped into the Magnificent Seven, but that's all investing these days. What could possibly go wrong? The real problem is that Australia is technically taking their cash, which is propped up by a mining industry, and then giving it to us so that we can build businesses here in America. A lot of Australian companies, which are not in the gaming, mining, or real estate industry, are actually choosing to raise investments and go public here in America instead. Simply because we have more investors that are willing to put money into companies that aren't in gambling, mining, or real estate. I mean, thanks, I guess. But if the country was more accommodating of other investments, it could use a lot of this savings to make its people and itself wealthier and more productive.
Yeah, and if something happens to the US economy, with all the tariffs and whatnot going on right now, who knows, but, down the road, especially with the inflation and the amount of money that's being printed in order to keep the debt, sustained, which isn't sustained, but it's exponentially getting worse. But in order to make the interest payments, we have to borrow money to pay that. If something happens down the road, Australia is going to be screwed because all of their money seems to be, or a large chunk of it seems to be in the U.S. stock market, not their own. That's very dangerous.
The wealth invested into the Australian superannuation system may also be very impressive, but it won't actually do much unless it can keep up with how expensive it is to live in Australia. A common strategy for Australian workers is to wait until they can access their retirement savings, take all of the money they accumulated over their working career,
and gamble it away,
and use it to pay off their house. So yeah, this is where we finally get to the elephant in the room.
So they just lose it all and on their house and that's it? They don't have a retirement? Okay.
Real estate. The cost of housing in Australia has made every single problem so far even worse, and it's also going to make it much harder to fix. According to a broad market survey, the average age of a first home buyer in Australia is 36 years old, and the fastest growing group of people buying a home for the first time are those aged between 40 and 49.
That's pretty old. I don't know what it is, in America, but 40 and 49 for your first house is pretty wild. I was talking to my grandmother the other day, and she was saying that when they bought their first house, obviously this is back, when money actually had more value, but she was like 20, and I heard that, I'm like, what? Like, and they weren't wealthy either, they worked like they were just normal people. But like, that's crazy.
Homes are so expensive that they are usually taken on with a 30-year mortgage, and families will move into larger homes as they build up equity. So a lot of Australians are now getting to the age they would like to retire still in massive debt.
What you do is you sell your house and you downsize to a lot smaller house, because when you're in retirement age, you don't need a huge house. You shouldn't have kids living at home. But you sell everything and you move to a smaller house, and then hopefully by that point, the house has enough equity that the house that you now move into has been covered and you don't have to worry about that.
Using the proceeds from superannuation to pay off their mortgage doesn't technically make them any poorer. They have just transferred retirement savings into real estate equity. But it does allow them to access the government's public old age pension, since it's not counted as an asset to assess if they have the ability to fund themselves. Since paying a mortgage or rent normally takes up so much of people's budget there, giving up retirement savings often works out to be more financially responsible, because even a modest pension income can cover everything else as long as they have a paid-off house to live in. For many households, this has made one of Australia's greatest wealth-building tools just another way to prop up a real estate market that is already so expensive that the rest of the world should be afraid of it. But how did it get this bad in the first place? There was the usual combination of investor speculation, generous financing, NIMBYism, and high levels of migration into cities that couldn't expand fast enough.
Yeah, and probably lack of development. A lot of places that have wild housing, markets are because they have, way too many people coming into the area who are buying houses, or you have people buying houses speculating that way too many people are coming in and the house value is going to go up. And then it's also from lack of development, whether that's red tape stopping developers or the housing market's not good, which, I mean, in this case, that's not, the case. It's specifically lack of development, I think, is the biggest thing.
But on top of that, Australia has added its own special ingredients. Taxes on earned income in Australia are some of the highest in the world. Someone earning the equivalent of just 120,000 American dollars a year would pay 45% on every additional dollar they earned after that.
Wow.
And remember, Australia is not a cheap place to live. So even though that would be a very good salary for anybody, it's not actually going to go that far after tax is taken out. However, one of the unique features of Australia is the fact that personal investment losses, including paper real estate losses, can be used to write off personal income to reduce their tax.
Oh, that's good then, I guess. But I think that's the same. Actually, I don't know if it is for housing.
This effectively makes every person in Australia their own little business that can accrue expenses to offset their tax. And the best business to get into with the most possible expenses is real estate. This tax structure has encouraged high-income earners to favor investing in a real estate that they can use to make paper losses like depreciation to offset their income, and then turn highly taxed earned income into much more modestly taxed capital gains. The system, called negative gearing, is almost universally agreed to be broken. It would be a lot easier to tax everybody at a lower rate and get rid of these write-offs. But it's been really hard to make that happen because they can't afford this house of cards to unravel. There is now so much debt and
That's like, it seems similar to China, because they had a lot of their economy was based on the real estate too. And China's been going through it right now, and they're trying to stimulate the economy and everything, and it doesn't seem to be working. They're actually having like a deflation situation, which isn't good, but I think arguably it may be better than inflation. Regardless, their housing market was like tanking, and I think the government was making it so that they couldn't lower house prices or something. Like, they're trying to stop it. But then real estate people were like, you'd sell a house, like if you bought a house, you would actually get gold bars or something to offset the price. So that's kind of a way to make it on the books, it would look like you bought the house for this much money, but then you're getting like $100,000 back worth of gold. So that way the house value is actually $100,000 less than what you purchased. They're going through it over there. So this just kind of reminds me of that.
Wealth tied up in Australian housing that the Australian economy could be wiped out by even the indication that the government could rein in these incentives. The same thing is happening with other less obvious policies as well. Immigration to Australia has been some of the most intense in the world, and the country has become highly dependent on low-income immigrants to do a lot of the jobs they aren't willing to, and high-income immigrants to also buy into their asset market.
That sounds familiar.
According to Henley Partners, a law firm specializing in legal arrangements for high net worth immigrants, over 40% of the millionaires in Australia today were not born there. Some have, of course,
You're importing millionaires. I mean, isn't that kind of what that whole gold card thing Trump's doing is? That sounds like it's probably going to benefit the housing market.
Gone there and made their fortunes, but most have just gone there and parked their fortunes that they already had. In all of the biggest issues in the world today, Australia is a look at what 10 years from now could mean for us. And perhaps the biggest problem is that so far they have managed to keep everything on track. But there is a difference between success and delayed consequences. Australia has some of the most valuable banking institutions in the world, but most of their books are tied up in lending to an overvalued real estate market. Workers are getting taxed heavily while dealing with declining real incomes. Businesses are finding it too expensive to operate there, and all of the wealth in the world, paper or otherwise, doesn't mean anything if it can only buy you a one-bedroom apartment 2 hours from anywhere. Now, if you are an Australian and this was all a bit depressing for you, it could be worse. You could be from the UK. Also, go and watch...
I mean, did he make a UK video? I'm kind of interested now. Anyway, that's it for this video. I think it was really interesting. I love these kind of videos. They're so cool. But yeah, I think it sounds like Australia really needs to start changing things And obviously there's going to be some pain, but it's like the same with the US, you know, kicking the debt down the road. It's rising faster and faster and faster. And it's at the point now where to make the interest payments on the debt, the US has to loan money to make interest payments. Are you telling me you think that's going to end well, where you're borrowing money to make interest payments on debt you have? So like, that doesn't make sense. Like, if you have a person who is in debt up to their elbows and they keep on taking on credit cards and maxing the credit cards out in order to pay interest on the debt that they have, are you telling me that they're not going to go bankrupt? But yeah, anyway, hope you guys like this video. Make sure you go subscribe to How Money Works. If you're new, subscribe. I'll see you guys next time.